This episode of Out of Spec Reviews is brought to you by Magna. More on that later. Hello and welcome back to another Out of Spec Reviews video. Welcome to the inside of the Rivian R1T and welcome to the driving review of this, where it's going to be super long, super nerdy. I'm going to share everything I'm feeling driving this vehicle in the city, on the highway, and of course shredding up in the canyons here in beautiful northern Colorado. That's what's most impressive to me. We have other videos, especially coming out on our Out of Spec Motoring sister channel, where I actually did some wheeling in this thing, took it up over the La Salle Mountains, went to Moab. All of that will be in the road trip video. But today it's all about the on-road driving dynamics of Rivian R1T. So let's start it. The nice thing is, to start it, you just put your foot on the brake and you lift up straight into reverse. It's all very quick, snappy, zero lag. I've let the vehicle sit outside overnight and then get in, not prepping the car, in and straight into reverse. Cameras come on, like no boot up time. So that's very impressive to me. It's actually way faster to boot up than my Tesla. I own a Tesla Model 3 Performance as one of our cars that we use, and man, this thing is, a lot of the touch points are the same, like the wipers are in the same spot, the shifter's the same as, Mercedes or a Tesla. The autopilot actuation in a Tesla is very similar to the Driver Plus actuation here in the Rivian, and it's all really good. So these videos are all about, driving dynamics, throttle feel, brake pedal feel, how the vehicle handles, and a lot of that comes down to low speed driving. So I just charged the vehicle up to 76% state of charge. So 218 miles projected at 76%. That's based off of my driving history, and I think that's pretty reasonable if you ask me. The range in this seems to be amazing. I hope you check out our road trip Out of Spec Motoring stuff. I think this video will go up before those are edited, but took this on a 2,000 mile trip and really learned a lot about the truck, pushed it to its limits in many different areas, and am leaving that trip completely in awe of its capabilities, especially considering this is a brand new vehicle. Like, this thing is solid. Anyway, let me tell you how far I've driven it, because I'm sure you'll ask. 3,116.8 miles in the last week I've driven this vehicle. So I think I might have one of the most highest mileage Rivian experiences outside of the company as a total independent person. And that was sort of not necessarily the goal, but just to be able to experience this thing, to do what we need to do with it, to test it for you guys, for potential owners, for reservation holders, to experience the truck. And so this is specifically about how the truck drives. This is not a full review, nothing like that. It's just driving. And we're starting in all-purpose mode. There are a few different driving modes. And let me just load up a secondary view for you here really quick so I can sync them. Basically, all-purpose mode here is one of the off-road, conserve, sport towing, or one of the drive mode selections you have. You have two different settings for your damper control, basically stiff and firm. You have 2 for brake regen. Standard is default. I actually really like it in high. And then 3 levels of traction control: on, reduced, and off. In all-purpose mode, you can choose from 3 ride heights: high, standard, and low. And those are essentially the 3 ride heights where I would recommend spending most of the time with the truck. That's where the suspension can work and it can flex around, and we'll talk about that as we go. But let's start with how I prefer to drive the vehicle around town after playing with every setting, which is all-purpose, ride in soft, max regen, of course, stability control on, there's no need to have it off for daily driving, and standard ride height, which is the softest. You see, I'm all about performance and ripping and shredding up canyon roads, but why do you need that if you're just going to be cruising around, at low speed? And the first thing we should talk about is this truck's nimbleness. So here's max turning radius. For a truck, it's truly insane. No rear steering, nothing like that. You can see it's about 2.5 turns lock to lock, plus or minus. So you can see that right here. We're just testing some of the low speed. Steering's really great. It's nice and light. The wheel itself is kind of nice, although I do wish it was finished in a little bit of a different material. I mean, I'm just nitpicking, but that's okay. I'm not sure a flat bottom steering wheel needs to be in a truck either. But again, just total nitpicking. So the steering's really, really great at low speed. And then we get into the throttle control. So when I lift off, big regen, and it comes all the way to a stop, and then it puts the vehicle into auto hold. A lot of times when I test electric cars with this one pedal driving calibration, what will happen is we get big regen, it lifts off, and then it grabs the brakes at the end when it blends to friction. This, you cannot tell. I've been really, honing in on this point on a lot of EVs, because to me, it really alters the ownership experience as to how comfortable the vehicle is to drive in a Starbucks drive-through, for example, inching forwards. And here, the throttle tip-in is really quite nice. You can feel it come off the friction brakes. I can lift back out, and it just goes to a stop. No perceptible, sort of odd drivetrain tuning. It's really good, and it's right on par with Tesla, who I think has some of the best low-speed pedal calibration for their vehicles. The throttle itself took me a second to get used to, and I think there's two issues I have with the throttle. The first is it's a little bit light and springy to put down. So a lot of this could also be because I'm sitting on top of the car, right? This is an SUV. So my foot isn't as far out. So it means I'm controlling the throttle much more with the pivot point in my ankle. And that is an interesting thing just to get used to, different, driving positions for different vehicles. But man, that regen is just, the one pedal is so good. The second thing I don't like is how long the throttle pedal is. Now, don't get me wrong, I like a long pedal that I can have a lot of modulation, but this is like, you gotta go really deep in the pedal if you wanna get to wide open throttle. So when you're driving it hard, it's actually a little bit awkward where you're like, whoa, gotta go in. I actually just got into an XC40 Recharge, the Volvo electric that we are testing this week, just to come pick this up at the DC fast charger. And yeah, I went to go full throttle and my foot just went poof, and I'm like, whoa, the floor is there. So these are all things you can get used to over time. So I guess we should talk about just driving around the city, right? In terms of acceleration, in terms of feel, positioning, sizing. This is where this truck really shines. You see, we have an F-150 hybrid in on test, which was the closest thing I could get to a Lightning, and that is big and wallowy. It's a great truck, don't get me wrong. I really like that truck. I like the way it drives. Not sold on the drivetrain tuning on that particular one, but that's for a different video. And here in the Rivian, it's smaller, it's compact. I have a very Range Rover-like view out the front. I have instant throttle response if I put my foot down. It's definitely got a lot of torque. And the vehicle's soft and it works, and it allows it to soak up some of these bumps and undulations. Coming into a stoplight, for example, with regen in high, I can really accurately modulate the throttle so I can get right up to the stop line like this and lift off completely, and now it will just bring us to a stop. No need to use the friction brake pedal pretty much ever. Now, if you put regen in standard, which a lot of people will probably want, it's actually still a lot of regen. It's the most amount of standard regen I've ever experienced in a vehicle other than Tesla. And so it shows that the Rivian engineers really wanted to recapture as much energy as possible under deceleration. And partially that's because it's not a brake-by-wire system. It doesn't do brake pedal blending. So all of your regen comes from the accelerator pedal. So as I accelerate, for example, and then I lift off in standard, still pretty strong regen. Even if I touch the brake pedal, it does not seem to add any more regen at all, which I think is the correct approach. Driving an electric car in my mind is regen and acceleration, so everything the motors can do with my right foot on the throttle, and then everything the friction brakes can do with the brake pedal. I think this is the best approach. There are some downsides to doing it this way, and that is usually peak regen under deceleration. And so let me just make sure fully that the brake pedal doesn't add regen. I haven't really had to use the brake pedal much this entire trip, but we'll just speed up a little bit. Speeding up, okay. So lifting off completely, touching the brakes, definitely not adding any more regen. So that's to be expected. The vehicle also regens harder at lower states of charge with a warm battery, as you would expect. Same as charging. It just can't stuff a lot of energy into the pack up top. But the nice thing is, even if you are fully charged, it retains the one pedal driving feel at low speed. So low speed calibration doesn't change. You just may not get as much regen at higher speeds with high state of charge. And it'll even come up with a warning that says regen is limited. So it's really like they just benchmarked Tesla here. And I think that, I keep saying it, is the correct approach. That's great. Now, the vehicle recommends a 70% daily charging limit. And one of the reasons that's smart to keep it to 70% every day, other than for battery life, the batteries like to be between 30 and 50% really long term. 70 is not far off of that. is that you can get more regen in at lower states of charge. So here I can already tell, even though regen is in high, even at 76%, I'm not getting as much as I would at 30% state of charge, where it could really stuff the juice in. So I'm really, you know, pleased with every throttle calibration, the power, the transition to regen, the sizing of the truck, the visibility out of the truck, the steering. It's all like nothing to complain about, which is odd from me. You guys know that. And it's just really, really well suited for sort of daily driving. It's the right size. It's not big. You can fit it in a parking space. We could put the dogs in it. It's all good. So now, you know, I guess we should talk a little bit more about maybe some higher speed stuff like this in general all-purpose mode. That's how I would drive the truck every day. Let me explain a little bit more about how the modes work, I guess. So all-purpose mode utilizes all 4 motors, and it targets a very, you know, sort of soft ride the way I have it set up. So you can see if I throw it into this corner, it kind of leans over on itself a little bit, which is not bad. So it's soft and wallowy. As I apply throttle, it doesn't do anything because we're at the limit of grip. It's not trying to oversteer the vehicle. It's just really nicely neutral balanced. You could put anyone in this car. It's not scary. I've gotten a lot of comments like, isn't it dangerous to put normal people in a pickup truck with 800 horsepower? And my answer is not even in the slightest. There's almost no torque steer. Look at that. That was no pressure on the wheel, and we just went straight. Anytime you have the vehicle loaded up, traction and stability controller right there, and it targets a very understeery type feel in all-purpose mode. And I think, you know, I would not feel like letting like a teenager drive this or anything. Nothing's scary about this, right? It's very approachable. Even though it has a lot of power, it seems right. By the way, this is the 4-motor version. I don't think I mentioned that. 4-motor, 135 kilowatt hour large pack. It's the only one on sale at the time of this recording. I'm really looking forward to trying their dual motor configuration, hopefully with a mechanically locking rear axle. We'll talk about that in a bit too. So that's how I would drive the truck every day. On the highway, when you're in all-purpose mode and you get above 60, 70 miles an hour cruising, occasionally the truck will lower itself down to low. And that is 1 down from the standard, but it's not the lowest. There's still 1 lower. And the truck rides fine in low. I really like the low suspension profile for highway. You get a little bit better aerodynamics, and all seems pretty good there. It still lets the suspension work in soft. I want to talk a little bit more about conserve on the highway, of course, but I should mention just some other things while we're on the way to our off-road trails. The towing profile. We've done a lot of towing with this truck and more videos to come on that, of course. I love that it has a built-in trailer brake gain control right here through the wheel. I can, you know, control everything this way, which is great. I love that it sets the ride to stiff, and I love that it sets the regen to high automatically. This thing tows like a beast. Now, the range while towing and cost while towing, we've answered those questions. It isn't great. It's expensive to tow with an electric truck, and it's very inefficient. But if you are going to tow up to 11,000 pounds on this particular truck, it is very confidence inspiring and very competent, more so than the F-150. We had the same 24-foot trailer hooked up to a F-150 hybrid, and that thing, it means a heavy trailer. We had a Model 3 in it. It was soft and wallowy, and the steering was a little light. Maybe it wasn't loaded totally perfectly because we were just throwing the car in there and hooking it up. And then we threw that exact trailer loaded the same way on the back of this Rivian, and you genuinely could not feel a trailer back there. It went straight and true. The suspension firmed up. It leveled itself out. And I was so impressed with the towing capability of this vehicle. And since we're on the way to the trails, I just want to touch on some off-road stuff. That's not the point of today's video, of course. The point of today's video is, you know, sort of performance driving, more or less, is what I really want to see how this thing does. But there's a few modes that I really like in this. Off-road auto, I have not fallen in love with. I haven't really found a good use case for it, maybe for snow or things like this, but for the most part, what I've genuinely used has been the rally function. And I love the calibration of the rally function. If you watch my video driving this truck in the snow on the same road we're heading up to, you'll see that rally lets you get some power on oversteer and then feeds in the power to the front to pull you straight. And I think that's really nice. I like the ride in soft and rally. It's really kind of fun, and you can throw it around a back road. I had it on some dirt roads in our out of spec motoring video, and we were rallying through it. It was very, very fun. The drift profile, I honestly haven't spent enough time with it to try the drift functionality. You know, we don't want to tear up our trails around here, and you really need to find the right spot on loose surface to drift it. It doesn't like to drift on pavement, at least, you know, without a lot of room and speed. And if we had this at our track in North Carolina, you bet I'd be trying to slide it around. But we've only had a limited use case or limited time with the truck this week, and I really tried to focus on the things that are actually going to matter to the enthusiast buying this truck, which part of that is going to be, how does this actually drive on a back road? A lot of people are going to be giving up their sports cars for this. So let's put the vehicle into its sport calibration. Sport will automatically go to the lowest ride height, but I actually raise it up one to the low. There's low and lowest. I go up to low, and I put the ride in soft, brake regen in high, and stability reduced, which is in the middle setting. And I find this is the best way to drive the truck on a road like we're going here. It's going to be bumpy and soft, and we want to let the suspension work. A lot of people think stiff cars are fast. In my opinion, no, I want to let the suspension work. Occasionally you do want the ride in stiff when you're really ripping it, you know, to just support the weight of the truck and to have a little bit better response to your inputs. But yeah, for a general 7/10 cruise, yeah, one up from the lowest, and soft seems to be good in sport mode. Still rides pretty firm in this setting. And what they're able to do, you know, what Rivian's able to do with software when you select a sport mode or any of the modes is really fine tune so many things. So I guess before we start driving it hard, let me explain how the suspension works and how the motors work. The suspension is an air spring basically, so totally ride height adjustable, difference of pressure. That's why standard is actually most comfortable. That's what the car was probably tuned for. As you lower the ride height of the vehicle, it lessens the amount of pressure in the air, so it relies on the rest of the suspension to sort of support the weight. That's why stiff is like this, you know, a little bit more responsive. Sport's like this. But if you put it into the lowest ride height, it actually gets really bouncy, like in conserve mode on the highway. We'll talk about that later. And the reason for that is the suspension's just aired out. There's nowhere for it to go. Like, there's no more movement. And so that's just one of the downsides you get there of having this type of setup. It's not a downside, it's just a massive adjustability. And then conversely, in off-road mode, when you raise it to the highest, it gets really bumpy and bouncy in the highest suspension ride height, and that's because the air springs are chocked full of air and there's, you know, a lot of pressure, so the suspension can't move. I actually prefer the high ride height setting for most general off-roading, and then highest only to clear an obstacle, and then I pull the truck back down, is what I found works pretty well. You also have an electric damper, and that's what is the ride is adjusting. So it can send current to the damper to basically stiffen itself, and then when it's soft and cruising, you actually back some of the current out, which is better for efficiency. So I think that's pretty sweet. So not only do you have ride height, but you also have wheel control in terms of damping that's adjustable with two settings here. But then within the stiff and soft, they have their own calibration for each of the drive modes, I find. Then you have a really neat hydraulic component that to me is magical. You have two basically high pressure hydraulic lines. One goes from compression to rebound on the other side, and from, you know, the opposite the other way. And so what you have is the ability to have infinitely controllable roll stiffness in the way the vehicle rides, which means when we were in all-purpose and going around that off-ramp, it allowed for a little bit of lean, but then I can feel the truck stiffen up and support the weight, but it still allows it to be soft and floaty on the road. It allows big articulation off-road. That's really the main benefit, is you can drop a wheel, maintain traction, and have big articulation. But obviously you don't want this soft, wallowy ride on a back road, and so you can basically bump up the hydraulic pressures, and that will basically increase roll stiffness. And it's magical. It's actually, I think, the same parts that McLaren uses for on-road and track performance. McLaren's ride magically smooth on the road and then are so hardcore on the track, and this is kind of like magically capable off-road and then like so hardcore on the road, and then like really soft on the or allows for a lot of articulation off-road. So I really love that. Just stopping here just because I want to launch it. I want to talk about this launching profile. Yeah, basically it's just, it's the breadth of capability that I've experienced this week is unlike any other vehicle, because it's so good on the street and it's so good off-road. It's not the best off-roader and it's not the most hardcore performance car, but the fact that it can get like 90% of the way on both ends and still be a comfortable daily driver and have all the power, it's really, it's the full package. I'm sold. I'm getting one. I think I've mentioned that in a video. Like, it's one of the few cars I've reviewed and I'm like, I can't live without that. I need that. It's sweet, but it's not perfect. Back to the roll stiffness conversation about the hydraulics. A lot of vehicles have disconnecting stabilizer bars or sway bars, depending on how you call it. So like the Bronco and the Jeep, for example, I'm sure you've seen videos in our Bronco review where we've loaded the truck up with articulation, right? We've put a wheel on a rock. We disconnect the sway bars, which is one of the only vehicles that can do it under load, and then the vehicle drops down and it just flexes out. And it goes limp, basically. And what that allows is the tire to work on the surface. And that's pretty much what happens here in the Rivian, but dynamically all the time. So I'm putting the suspension into lowest, the ride in stiff. We're sport mode on, regen on, stability reduced, doesn't matter. Left foot to the floor on the brake, flooring it with the right. Literally nothing happens. You don't feel anything here. And then to launch it, you just pop off the brake pedal. And it is a little bit faster. You can feel it's faster to do it this way. Ready? It still gets me every time that a pickup truck can jump off the line and then have sustained performance like this all the way to top speed. I mean, when you hit triple digits, kilometers, wink, wink, it starts to ramp up even more. It's truly crazy, truly crazy. So, and then you throw it into a corner and you can see how like stiff and hardcore the car is. I'm gonna adjust a couple settings because it's actually set up too stiff for a back road. I don't know if you can see this sort of bouncing action here, but it gets hardcore. Like for track driving, you can really turn this thing up if you want to on a smooth surface. But I like the suspension to work a little bit personally. So we're gonna go in sport mode, ride to low, and I'm gonna put the ride height to low and the ride in soft. I have a water bottle that I'm gonna put in here. Always make sure you put all of your stuff away before you rip, of course. So we have basically sport mode, ride in soft, brake regen high, stability reduced, and ride height low. I'll just include a little picture of that for you so you can see what I'm talking about. And basically this essentially is the optimal setting for a back road Sunday morning drive. If you live at the top of this road, this is how I would drive it, basically up here. And this is good for a flowing speed. So, but let's motor. So with individual motor control, what the vehicle can do is it can apply individual power outputs to the exact wheel that it wants to go to. Now the motors are mounted inboard with half shafts on the way out. There's no like drivetrain wobble or anything like that, although I did accelerate hard in high suspension and it made a pretty bad noise, so I wouldn't recommend doing that. Also, there's one more thing I do want to actually mention. There's a little drivetrain rocking motion you hear at low speed. It's the only negative about the truck. I meant to include this. Hear this knock? Okay, so what that knock is basically, I'm not sure if it's the motors rocking on their mounts or if it's the half shafts, the axles rocking within the motors, but you do experience this at low speed, backing in and out basically of a corner. So high state of charge will always give you more power. We're at 70%, that's plenty to give us pretty good juice here. The motors sound super healthy. I believe they're Bosch sourced motors. They're not built in-house, but they're optimized in-house and it's really good. So again, we're in sort of this middle sport setting and it's so amazing, sort of the speed and capabilities of this truck coming in under braking. Really good brakes. It's a little bit of a long brake pedal, but it feels awesome. And essentially the steering is light, but direct. I prefer a light steering in a car, to be honest. So power out of the corner. Look at that, power on with a little bit of rotation. And again, we're not going too hard. But in sport mode, you can, with stability and reduced, basically angle the car with throttle. And even on regen too, you can kind of chuck this thing into a corner and the back end will come around and then power out. And you can come out with straight angle on the wheel, which is honestly really fun. You would have no idea this thing weighs 7,000 pounds and is a truck and is just this freaking capable at shredding. It's truly impressive. I'm just going slow here because I saw potentially there was some road work up ahead. I don't want to come flying up on people, right? We're still on public roads. We want to be mindful of what we're doing. We're not on a track. So let's just creep around the corner. Don't really see anything. And here's another sign. So with the motors, essentially, there's no way to lock the front or rear axle mechanically. And with a sport mode, a lot of performance vehicles will have sort of this limited slip diff. I'm sure you've heard this before. I don't know if you saw the steering wheel just do that, but it's on corners, the lane assistant is too aggressive. And so I can go into settings and then turn lane keeping assist off, and then it basically just lets me have full control of the wheel. I think the undulations in the corners, you can see the truck sometimes misses where the lines are on roads like this, and it's too aggressive in supplying support. Great on the highway though, really good system, although I would like to see a little bit more leeway, let you get closer to the line before it starts to intervene. So with 4 individual motors, like I said, no way to lock. Limited slip diffs are great because when you come out of a corner, if you can lock the outside and the inside wheel to the same speed, it basically will allow the car under throttle to essentially slide the rear end out a little bit, which is pretty cool. And we're coming to a stop here for road work. What you get in this situation is essentially a virtual control over the axle. And with that, oh, they're like fixing the road. This is sweet. With that, they're able to basically target a slip percentage between left and right wheels. And if they notice that that percentage is getting out of wherever the tolerance is that they've set, they basically, apply torque to the slower wheel or regen to the faster wheel and start to bring those wheel speeds closer together. And you can feel this happening. You can not really tell too much about torque vectoring, but it is pretty, at least nice to see this individual motor control. I would like to see more of it. The power is just insane. The power is insane. And the suspension in this setting here is truly good at just soaking everything up. It just flows with the road. It lets the vehicle work a little bit. It's so fast on a back road, truly so fast. And there's so much regen that you really aren't using brakes if you plan ahead. Now, if you're going for time, like if you're on a rally circuit or you're on a track, you're gonna be coming into corners, standing on the brakes like this, back to full power, maximizing every inch. But with so much regen off throttle, you actually don't burn a ton of juice driving it quickly. You know what? Why don't we reset the trip calculation and see what we get, sort of worst case scenario, heading up to the top of this road. I think that would be kind of fun to find out. I just love driving this truck. Here we are, full power, coming in under brakes to a tight corner. Brake pedal's not the best feeling. It's a little soft. Coming through, big power. I can feel ESP just brushing the brakes there. Feels so nice. I really love getting this thing loaded up in a corner like this and then matting the throttle at corner exit. It absolutely just bombs up a road, like insanely hard. Just and these tires, by the way, we're on the all-terrain 20-inch tires. I should have mentioned that. We've made so many videos, I forget what I need to put in the intro or not. But we're on the off-road tires. The sport wheel and tire might be overall a heavier package. These tires are actually probably pretty heavy, but overall, you would have a little bit better turn-in response. Basically, the less rubber there is, the more responsive it's going to be to your inputs. But these are pretty good. You can see I put in steering input to the wheel and the truck changes direction. It's freaking ESP out. Now let's do that same thing but with ESP off. So stability off, turn off stability. Let's see what it does here. Yeah, I can feel the delay more here because it's allowing the vehicle to basically wallow around. But it feels pretty good. If I put it in lowest with the ride in stiff, so this is the most hardcore setting, I'm gonna give it a second to not do anything crazy while it lowers it down. I don't wanna like overload the suspension while it's doing a height adjustment. Now we're in stiff and lowest. Oh yeah, hardcore. This thing can change direction so quickly and so fast for such a heavy vehicle. Part of that is because the battery pack is in the center of the vehicle, so its center point of rotation can be adjusted basically based off of the suspension kinematics, but it feels like it's somewhere about here. It's actually a really far forward rotation point, which is great because when you stick it into a corner and you want to slide the car around, it's like, what? It's really fun. And with having the weight down low, of course, your center of mass is quite low in the vehicle, and so there's just less roll that you're trying to counteract. But the suspension is magical, and it really can handle quite a bit of abuse on road. I've hammered this vehicle down some back roads when I was like in a hurry to get places, and I was like, wow, we are covering distance quickly in this thing. Now, the one thing we haven't really touched on yet is the brake pedal, so we should really... Man, it is actually so fun to drive this thing hard because the motors sound good. It's what, I don't know, like maybe Taycan's faster than this, but this is actually kind of fun to stick around. Let's do a full emergency braking test. It just takes a long time to stop because it's heavy. But the pedal feel is great. It's a long pedal. You can feel it's I'm pretty sure it's an e-booster. So the brake booster boosts up, applies emergency braking pressure, basically on-limit braking to the calipers. I'm not sure if we had ABS through braking through, or regen through ABS. Let's just try that really quick. Yeah, it definitely backs regen off the harder you get on the brake pedal to allow the ABS to take over, and that's something that can be adapted through software where it can maintain harder regen through ABS. Again, it's not really that needed to optimize for efficiency, because how much of the time are you in emergency braking scenario? But cars like the Taycan and EQS can still maintain pretty much 200 plus kilowatt through an emergency braking situation of regen, which is interesting, but again, not needed for the engineers to like spend too much time working on stuff like that, because they had to engineer an entire vehicle and the braking, like everything, up to basically their first ever car. And so the stuff that they did focus on, it all matters to me, and it's all really, really good. So the throttle performance, after being quite hard on it on the way, see more and more regen at lower states of charge. I can definitely see the gauge back there. It peaked a little bit higher. Power still feels strong, but I can feel it back down a little bit up top. And it could just be a temperature thing. It could just be a state of charge thing where it can't output all that current for too long at lower state of charge, or it's just a thermal situation. But there is no question that if you're in a hurry to get someplace quickly, the Rivian can do it. It can do all the sports car stuff. And you would never expect something like this from a pickup truck. There's no other vehicle on the market that handles as hardcore as this on a back road and can pretty much climb a mountain like I did last week, which I hope you'll see in that video. I was really out in the middle of the woods, like in the middle of nowhere with this thing, aired down on the tires, you know, trudging through mud, and it took it like a champ. And now here we are bombing up one of the best roads here in Colorado, and it's so fun. We have everything in hardcore mode here, coming in under braking. Vehicle feels stable, confidence inspiring. We have a big bump. Can it absorb it? Let's see. Yeah, it's not enough suspension travel in the lowest ride height for that. I would definitely back it off a little bit. But when you get up it and you want to like really just shred this thing, it's great. And I'm honestly so impressed with these tires. They're Pirelli Scorpion all-season tires, but they're a Rivian OE tread compound selection, as well as an electric tire. So it's designed to handle the compromise between longitudinal acceleration, deceleration, so big torque loads forward and back, but also you know, the low rolling resistance of needing to get range. And this vehicle has huge range. I tested it at just about 290 miles at 70 miles an hour. What other car can do that? We just chucked it in a corner, matted the throttle, and it just right up, and it's so freaking good at this kind of stuff. And never has a pickup truck ever handled like this, because they've always been super wet, noodly, wobbly. This is not. Also, it uses, I think, like a ladder frame chassis. I don't think this is unibody, but it's kind of shaped like a unibody because the bed's connected, but I don't think it is a unibody. It's insane. The suspension on this is wild, and you can tell that the battery pack being down there adds to the stiffness of the chassis. It definitely is a structural component of the vehicle. So let's see how it is just in the tight sections on the hill climb. Coming up in sport mode, everything's loaded up, tight corner. Let's mat the throttle. A little bit of opposite lock. You can feel it basically sending power to different wheels. That is the weird thing with 4 motors. With 4 motors, it's hard to gauge where the system is going to send the power, and it's not as, I would say, reliable as a locking rear differential, that I can just say, I know these wheels are going to spin at the same speed. I can control my throttle. Here, I'm like, okay, foot down. What's the truck going to spin up now? Where's the power going to go? And maybe it just takes more time to get used to it, but it's so freaking hardcore, this thing. And we've hammered it up this hill, admittedly not as hard as some other vehicles we've had up here. Beautiful views at the top. Motors sound good. Let's do big regen. Big regen. I want to see if we can overheat the motors, basically. So we're in max regen down a really steep hill. It's still slowing us down, which is impressive. Chucking it into a corner. And now we have regen limit. Big regen limit here. So I've experienced this a couple times with the vehicle, where it does definitely have some thermal limit, which makes sense. It says regenerative braking reduced, use the brakes to slow down. So that definitely adds up and makes sense. And I can see someone pulling out of their driveway way up ahead, so we're just going to slow down. So you can toast the motors, but it really takes quite a bit of hard driving. And in terms of power, still outputs full power, just not full regen. Wow. So we've driven 7 miles pretty hard, and we've averaged 0.7 miles per kilowatt hour. We used 10 kilowatt hours to go 7 miles. So definitely, if you're going to shred this thing, expect under 1 mile per kilowatt hour, especially on a hill climb. But when you factor in the round trip, you'll probably at least get to the bottom with the same state of charge that you left with. In my experience, you don't really gain too much on the way down. It's still a heavy vehicle with rolling resistance. And yeah, I mean, so the motors were just toasted there. Let's just launch it and see if they still have good full acceleration. Yep, and there's peak. So it will still peak power there, even though we just cut regen. This thing is truly incredible on a back road, way more hardcore than anyone would ever need. I do think if you were going to drive it hard, though, it would be great to do some like a little bit better brake lines. Maybe the pedal's just squishy. The power is there from the braking system, but I would like a bit more response, a bit firmer of a brake pedal. But again, I'm evaluating a pickup truck like a sports car on a back road, and the brake pedal's really the only thing I have to complain about. And it's not even a complaint. It's like, it's great. I wouldn't even change it on mine. If I bought one, I would just leave it. But it would be nice to have a little bit more braking feel. I can hear the coolers going for the whole system. Fans are running, AC compressors running. Let's take it out on the highway, talk about the efficiency of this, how eco mode works, how I would set up the car for highway driving. But overall, I can't get enough of driving this on a back road. It's so mind-bendingly impressive. And it can tow 11,000 pounds. Like, what? It's crazy. This episode is proudly brought to you by Magna. Magna is a mobility technology company that is super unique because they touch every aspect of almost every car on the market, especially a lot of electric vehicles, and they even can produce vehicles from the ground up. Now, you may remember I shot a series just recently testing some of their new electric vehicle powertrains, so stay tuned for a lot of Magna content to come. We're going to be going in depth with some really interesting topics with these guys, and Out of Spec wants to thank Magna for sponsoring this review and tons of other videos to come right here on Out of Spec. We look forward to working with Magna to define and find out what the future of mobility looks like. So in terms of spec on the truck, I should have gone through this. We have the 20-inch all-terrain. I have them set at factory PSI, 48 PSI. Sorry for not putting this at the beginning of the video. I guess I could, but I won't. It's out of spec. We are missing a center cap over here before someone comments. I have no idea what happened to it. Maybe one of the excursions. I'm not totally sure because we didn't scratch any wheels. That just fell out. So that's a little bit curious. But man, does it look interesting. You can hear the fans going. I have climate control off right now. All of that is just to cool the battery pack from the big hill climb on the way up here. And that could be maybe a downside of going with a 400 volt system architecture, that things could get a little bit more heated, if you will. But really, the thermal longevity is so much better than some other cars we've tested. We've overheated so many EVs on this loop. Now, granted, it is a little bit chillier outside today, but again, factoring in this was just DC fast charged and warmed up before coming up here, I'm just so impressed with the thermal capabilities of this truck. It never even overheated while towing with huge headwinds too. So yeah, they've figured out drivetrain tuning like no other. I figured you might want to join me for a little bit on the downhill just to see how the brakes hold up with stopping this 7,000 pound beast. I just let it cool down for like a minute. Right now I have the suspension height in low, not lowest. I have ride in stiff because, yeah, I'm so torn between soft and stiff sort of on a back road. I think you can play around with it and feel it. You definitely get much better response with the suspension set to stiff than soft. Regen in high always, because even though you can overheat the motors with regen, they thermally recover much quicker than the physical braking system, the service brake system would recover from heat. Yeah, they're not drilled or slotted. I mean, they're vented, but yeah, still pretty solid. You know, definitely braked very nicely for the weight of this truck, I would say. And we're getting big regen on the way in. what's interesting is when you get the brakes hot, I didn't do it here, but we were drag racing this on the runway. We're doing wide opens and brakes and, you know, filming some videos there. It definitely pops up with some error messages when you get the brakes hot. Just, you know, let them cool down, and it went away. It was fine. But that's, the Tesla actually does the same thing. It says like, brakes are overheated, blah, blah, blah. That's a different, and a situation where a locking differential would have been helpful. I applied throttle, it just spun the inside, and I didn't give it enough time for it to basically have computer logic to get to the outside wheel to help power us out of the corner. And if I stayed in it and applied more throttle, I probably could have, you know, yawed the vehicle a little bit, you know, around, but, you know, it's fine. I really love this sport mode calibration. It's perfect for a back road blast because it allows serious slip angle before, you know, it starts to cut in and shift power frontwards. It's very difficult for a automaker to tune 2 motors, let alone 4, because actually just controlling difference in axle wheel speed on a split mu surface. So if you have a really grippy surface and a really not grippy surface, it's quite time consuming to tune your drivetrain to back the front off, but then juice the rear a little bit to keep the same level of acceleration, but from different motors. I can't imagine doing it with 4. It's the first vehicle I've ever driven with 4 motors, and it's very capable, but it's also a little bit awkward because of that situation that I explained back there, where you have to let the system think to virtually lock axles and to send power and to do torque vectoring. There's no mechanical locker. And actually, one thing I really appreciate about Taycan and RS e-tron GT, that J1 platform, is coming out of a corner, it has a mechanical rear locker in the spicy ones, and if you just mat the throttle, it just goes lock, and you're like, and it's totally predictable. And I mean, the speeds are much higher than this truck, of course. You're on like 315, you know, Cup 2s if you want to get a real aggressive tire on those things, but I think they ship with PS4Ss, so the speeds are significantly higher. And it's just nice to have the confidence of a mechanical locking rear diff from a performance standpoint. From an everyday standpoint, for the general driver, for the, you know, off-road enthusiast who's getting more into it, maybe doing this virtual locking situation is better. And it certainly allows for more control. But I would be curious about that Rivian dual motor setup that's coming. I don't know how aggressive it's going to be in terms of power output, but that might actually be a little bit even more predictable when you start off-roading it, if you can just say lock everything. Well, we'll have to see at least. I was impressed with this off-road. I did put it in rock crawl mode in Moab, and it just was like... and it was just finding traction. It would get maybe a quarter or a half turn of wheel slip, and I could feel it transferring power around to get me up Baby Lion's back, which isn't like the craziest, steepest thing ever, but still impressive to feel a drivetrain under huge load. You have to imagine, when the motors aren't spinning very much, you have to dump a ton of current into them, and they did not overheat on that hill climb or really anything out there. So the motor's thermals are great. The battery pack's so big. The bigger the battery pack, the less the thermal becomes an issue. Although the in and out ports and connections, those can still get quite hot. I know I'm just rambling, but I feel like this might be information you're interested in. I don't know, it's stuff that I've found. Love the sound of these things. It's kind of got this second wave. Once you hit triple digits, it just applies even more power, which is quite impressive. And it's just so nice to ride around in not the stiffest or the lowest setting, the one up, just through these flowing S turns. It's got great steering. The ratio is good. Actually, feedback, even with the all-terrain tires, is more than I would have ever expected. I would love to try the sport wheels and tires with, again, a little bit better response. I can feel a little bit of regen limit there. Might just start be getting them hot on the downhill. I'd be curious how this does towing down a steep hill, if the motors have a regen limitation that they hit. I'm sure you can, because I've hit it on the street. And there you have it, just cruising in the Rivian. It's a lovely experience, very grown-up experience. And the most mind-blowing thing to me is, like, this is their first vehicle. Granted, I know a lot of the engineers came from other companies, but this is what happens when you take some of the best engineers. I don't actually know who engineered the suspension. I'm just saying, by the way this truck drives, they must have had some of the best in the industry, because it's a very good holistic package. And again, I'm just guessing here, but this is what happens when you take some great automotive engineers who have the passion to make something amazing, but their previous company either didn't because of budgeting concerns or it wasn't part of their product portfolio, and Rivian just said, make this thing insanely good. This is what happens when you have a lot of talent and you make something insanely good. I mean, it's by far the most impressive vehicle I've driven all year. And just the fact that I took a Model S Plaid up this road, which is significantly faster in a straight line, but this was before track mode was released, because I know the Tesla people will be like, well, track mode's out now. This thing would smoke a Plaid in the corners without question before the track mode thing. I haven't driven a Plaid with track mode yet, so I'm looking forward to trying that. But that would give you no power, you could get no rotation, it was no fun, and you could see coming up the steep hill climb, we were coming out of corners with not necessarily opposite lock, but neutral steering, and the vehicle was just coming around nicely and then shifting power to the front motors and pulling us out right at the right time. It's just like magically tuned here. And I think they can still work on the 4-motor calibration a bit more. Anyway, I know I'm rambling. Let's go jump on the highway and see how this thing cruises after I've done about 2,500 miles of just straight highway driving in the last 7 days with this thing. By the way, now down at the bottom of the hill, you can see we didn't really gain any energy, but we also didn't really lose much. I think we only burned maybe 1 kilowatt hour or so, and I've been on flat ground for maybe a mile or two. So, you know, like I said, going downhill, usually you don't recapture too much, but you usually don't burn anything, and we saw that here. Well, now that we are finished ripping, it's time to take a look at the highway stuff. So let's go here, let's go here. Let's not crash into an Audi, thank you very much. Let's go this way. And it just hammers out of a corner, so good, so awesome. So that is just impressive acceleration. Let's talk high speed stuff. And by high speed, I mean cruising. How would you want the truck set up for daily driving on the highway? And honestly, the city drive profile, the all-purpose, is the way to go. Now, everyone's been asking about the noise in this truck, and when we shoot our driver assistance video, I'm going to compare the noise of this to a Tesla, to a Volvo XC40, to a F-150 hybrid, which is the closest thing I could find to a Lightning. So that is to come, don't worry. But I would say on initial impression, it's not the quietest car, especially with the wind. I mean, there's just a lot of area here. The road noise, especially considering we're on all-terrain tires, is really good. You can hear a bit of cavity noise right now, that high-pitched noise, but that's to be expected. You don't really notice it on like nice smooth surfaces. The tire quality and design and compound is really actually great. The suspension on the highway in this all-purpose with the damper, it's soft and ride height at either standard or low. We're in low right now, which is 1 down. I have a little indication here. Is superb. It's amazing. And so we are just kind of floating around here, rocking. And it's so comfortable and relaxing to just do big miles. I did about 950, call it 1,000 miles just yesterday, straight through, sun up, sun down, after sundown, 1,000-mile long slog home. And it was not fatiguing really at all. The seats are wonderful. Where I can put my arms is great. I can either go up here on the door panel or in the center console or where my elbow is here now. These are big bumps and it's very smooth and it's well controlled. And all of everything on the highway is just, you know, it's an amazing road tripper, also very capable, also can tow. It just adds to the breadth of capability of this truck, which is seemingly limitless. There are some issues though. The first is the driver assistance system. We have a whole video going in depth on this. When it works, it's amazing. It's very competent lane centering. It can do corners except for the very sharpest of bends. But it's so finicky about when to turn on that for the most part, you can't use it. Or at least in my experience here in Colorado, I can't use it. Pretty much anything north of Colorado Springs has almost no mapped highways. So it's pretty, like, it's almost useless where I live. And, you know, I used it a bit yesterday on the road, but like even on roads that were mapped, it would just say it's unavailable. It gives you 3 warnings. The first is you can't turn it on because you ignored something, you didn't touch the wheel, and so, you know, that when we do our testing, I always see how the car gets your attention. If you basically ignore the driver assistance warnings, they'll put you in what I'm calling Rivian jail. We call it autopilot jail on the Tesla side, where, oh, you didn't put your hands on the wheel, now the car won't let you get back into the system unless you cycle the drive cycle, so you get out of the car, get back in. Same thing here. The second warning that I've seen is we're not on a mapped highway. That's what it would say here, unavailable on this road, because this is not a pre-mapped highway, and that's to be expected. This is very much a side road heading between Fort Collins and Laramie. A beautiful one at that, though. And then the third warning I've seen is just the system is unavailable at the time, or something like this. It's just like not available. And I'm like, what could that possibly mean? It's not that a sensor's blocked, because that pops up a separate warning that the sensors are blocked. And I think it's just like glitching out and not working, and that is like 80% of the time in my experience. At least on the way down to Phoenix, I used the driver assistance maybe 5% of the time was available or less, and it really only was when I was just getting into Phoenix. Let's get out, rip it in all-purpose mode, full power, traction control going, straighten the wheel, goes like hell. And so that's its main issue, I would say, is driver assistance is the weak point. When you can get it on, if you live in an area with mapped roads, it's awesome. I don't know how to find out what roads are mapped and not for this system, because I think it's different than the Super Cruise and with Ford's Blue Cruise. Maybe it's not, but I've been trying to figure this out, and I can't find like a website that's like Rivian road mapping. Perhaps we'll just have to create one on our own from the enthusiast group. Don't count me in on that. I don't own one of these, but hopefully some owners will do something like that. Then let's just talk about some other driving modes on the highway. So the 2 drive modes you're really ever going to use on the highway are all-purpose and standard like we are now, or low ride height and soft, and just waft along. And then for a marginal benefit in efficiency, you can go into conserve mode. And what conserve mode does is it drops the vehicle all the way down to the lowest ride height. Remember the bounciness I was telling you about? There's not much room for the suspension to work. That translates through to here big time. You really are just, basically feels like you're riding around on the bump stops with a tiny bit of basically absorption level. What this also does is it disables the rear motors. It uses the front motors. I think they're all the same motors, but the front has a taller gear ratio, which keeps the motor spinning in a little bit of a healthier RPM range for efficiency. We're talking marginal stuff, but it does seem to make sense, and it does limit your power. When you floor it, it's still pretty quick, but you can tell it's just front wheel drive, and you can hear the front wheels ripping into the pavement. If anything, I feel like they're overdriving the front motors a little bit in this mode. I'm not sure if they actually produce that much torque in sport mode. Perhaps they do, maybe during a launch thing, but that's still great acceleration in conserve. Off the line, when you floor it in conserve mode, this is the bumpiness I was talking about. It's definitely a little lethargic. Ride quality, you can set, again, from soft to stiff, and for really bumpy roads like this, I actually find stiff is the better setting to run in, because it at least helps the suspension not bottom out, and it stops some of the bounce. But if you're on little undulations, definitely putting it in soft helps with the smaller absorption impacts. So that seems to be the way to go for kind of stuff like this, I would say. Oh no, these 2 guys had a head-on collision. That is freaking scary. They swiped each other's side. That is my biggest fear driving on this road, is there's no center barrier and you just don't want to get pushed in. So speaking of that, let's try the lane keep assist function. So I'm basically going to angle the car to the left, not touch the wheel, and you can see it says keep control of the wheel. I don't think I had enough angle. I think the curvature of the road pulled us. Here we go. Let's do it. You can see it pushes us back in. We get a yellow display on the wheel, and that works really well. And honestly, that's what's going to help you most of the time, more so than the Driver Plus lane centering function, which again, a whole video is coming just on that, all the nerdy stuff you want to know. But yeah, so the lane assist on the highway is really nice, where it just kind of nudges you, it holds you to the line. For a corner, it doesn't just push you, it brings you around the corner. So what basically, even if we have a lot of, you know, sort of left movement here, you can see, pushes us, grabs us, and pushes us back the correct way, but doesn't angle us out. It basically locks us to the direction of the road and I think that's much safer. Really nicely done. If anything, it's a little bit aggressive on a back road, but on the highway the tuning's really good, except for sharp corners. It seems to like freak out a little bit more with sharp corners, and I'm like, oh, what's it doing? Because I'm driving normally and I feel the car yank the wheel. So again, this can be fine-tuned through software. And that's the moral of the story here with the Rivian. I'm going to go back into all-purpose mode. By the way, just to comment on the efficiency increase in conserve, I attempted to test all of the different drive modes and configurations, tent on the back, tonneau closed, open, etc., and get a log of the efficiency level of each. And I just don't have enough time with the truck. You know, 1 week to do everything we tried to do wasn't enough. It was like midnight. I was running loops back and forth, and there were only 13, 14 miles. And every drive mode, no matter what I did, got me the same 2.2 miles per kilowatt hour at 70 miles an hour. And so basically we just need more distance to level that out. And it also shows it's not that big of a deal. So I would really only use conserve if you're on a road trip and you're just stretching it to the charger. But I drove a lot yesterday and the day before on my road trip in all-purpose, and it was totally fine for that. Plus the truck looks really silly lowered out. I think it looks dumb slammed, at least on the all-terrain wheels. Like when I drive it in conserve and then I pull off to go to a charger, I'm like, oh, put it back in all-purpose and raise it back to normal height, because it looks so wimpy slammed on the ground. Looks like a Range Rover with failed air suspension. You know those L322 generation Range Rovers that are just aired out now and have hit that stage? That's what this looks like to me in sport mode. So I really like it with some height on it. And then when I'm ripping, yeah, I'll drop it down, drive it, whatever, park it, raise back up. And hopefully you learned a little bit about how the R1T drives, rides, and performs. It's so good at everything I've done with it that it's truly mind-blowing. Again, it's not a specialist in any category. Could you build a more aggressive off-roader? Yes. Could you build something that obviously drives better on the highway? Yes. Look at any modern S-Class. Could you build something that rips harder up a back road? Obviously, GT4 RS, right? But when you factor in that this thing can be compared with sports cars on a back road, not necessarily in their speed, but in the feel and the handling dynamics of the truck, and that you can compare it to something very soft and luxurious on the highway that can sort of waft you down. This doesn't really waft, but it is very controlled. And by controlled, I mean softer. It's been a long week. I got home at 5 a.m., 4 a.m. Anyway, what I'm saying is there's honestly no better all-rounder than this truck. It's a pickup truck that's also a sports car, that's an adventure vehicle, that's a road tripper, and everything like that. The only downside to this truck for me, like if I was to say I really want the Rivian R1T, and I do, and I'm gonna get one, and I'm like, I'm all in, it's the charging performance is the biggest limitation for me. The 400 volt situation really limits its peak charging rate to, yeah, I'll have a whole video on it coming. Thanks for watching another Out of Spec Reviews video. I hope you learned a bit. I certainly did. This was the first time I've really shredded it, you know, on camera at least. And in our Out of Spec motoring video, I hustled it down a back road, but a much higher speed back road. And on a higher speed back road, I have to say there's less rotation and just more competence. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely geared towards understeer, but you can just into a corner, high speed, suspension loaded up. It's very controlled, very confidence inspiring. We didn't do much of that today, of course, because this is more of like a power out and rotate. Electric smart, that's cool. Sweet. See you on the next one. Gotta film some more. Bye-bye.